Well, good morning, folks. Welcome to the Rangers Reviews morning briefing on Thursday, the 26th of August, ahead of what was a really big night for Rangers in their second leg Europa League qualifier away in Armenia against Alashkert. We've got a lot to get through after a really busy couple of days coming out of Ibrox, and it's a big night, Johnny. It doesn't quite have the feel of the previous three qualifiers in terms of the magnitude of the task, but I guess given now the circumstances, it certainly makes it more difficult than we thought it would be, speaking this time last week ahead of the first leg, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 1-0 is never a secure scoreline in European football. We know, obviously, now that the away goals rule has been scrapped, so it makes it even less secure from the first leg. Previously, if you'd gone through from the first game 1-0, you'd have probably been in pretty good shape, given you hadn't conceded an away goal, and it meant that if you score, especially score first in the away tie, you're in really good position. But that's obviously changed now, it's going to be a difficult game with all the situation that's surrounded Rangers in terms of the COVID call-offs. But Alashkert, Josh, I'm sure you'll be able to tell me in terms of the statistics. I think it was 0.01 expected goals in the last game. Didn't really offer much of a threat, so I think we could safely say that whatever team Rangers put out, and we know the players that are missing, the 6 players or 7 players, but ultimately they should still have enough in the tank, shouldn't they?
Yeah, and I think it's actually better in a sense that there's some adversity almost, because if you look back to the game last week, Rangers didn't start playing until they went down to 10 men, and the crowd had to get behind them, and now going into this game, there is a little bit more of a siege mentality that's needed because of the circumstances, because of the slightly rocky start to the season and the game at the weekend. And I actually think that could benefit the squad, because I think what is the downfall, or was the downfall last week, was Rangers beating themselves by playing with a terrible intensity that was was horrible to watch in that first half. So Alashkert, what impressed me about Alashkert was that they actually took the ball out the back quite a lot, and I hadn't seen as much of that when I'd watched them, but I don't think Rangers pressed them to the degree they're capable of. But you'd hope that the Rangers team, as you say, regardless of 6 players missing and a couple through suspension as well, would be, more than capable of beating Alashkert. The only shot they had was from 25 yards. And so an XG of 0.01 was a nice little stat to demonstrate that they didn't have any efforts on goal. Stephen Davis did almost give the ball away in the middle of the pitch, which would have allowed them through, which would have definitely put that number up. But you'd certainly be confident going away from home, even with that starting 11 that's been mooted, which we'll come on to, that they can do the job. I mean, if you look at the players that are missing, I tend to think Aribo will play in the midfield, and probably, or maybe Aribo and Hadji and Morelos, and maybe Itten, with Davies and Kamara behind them. I think Kamara is just such a big player for Rangers in Europe, and regardless of the opposition, is just so influential to how that team ticks. Talk me through your team tonight, how confident you are that they'll get the job done.
Well, listen, the team that I selected that's on the website is as follows: McCrory in goal, because there's no option there. Barisic left back, Helander, Goldson, Patterson. I've got no worries about that defence at all. Absolutely. People in the past would have seen the loss of James Tavernier as absolutely nightmarish for Rangers, as the one player you can't lose. But because Nathan Patterson has been so good, has so much talent, is essentially an identical version of James Tavernier, but younger in a lot of ways. I just see that as a like-for-like swap. In midfield, Kamara on the left, Davis in the middle, Arfield on the right. Again, defensive midfield, they've just not really been badly affected by this, have they? Mm-hmm. It's the goalkeeping position and the kind of attacking midfield players. So the big question is, how do you mix it up in the forward areas? I would go for Aribo on the left, Hadji on the right, with Morelos up top. Now, you could go to a sort of 4-3-1-2, which I think is what you're alluding to, and have Morelos and Itten up top, with Itten on the right, and perhaps Hadji dropping in. But I think I prefer this as a sort of more. It's more about winning the midfield in this game. You're already a goal up. Yes, there's not a lot of pace in wide areas in the team that I've just read out, but you're not really having to go and score 5 or 6 goals, or getting behind them so much, because you've already got a lead. So I think it's perfect for that.
Yeah, and I think the thing is with Patterson, I think you're right. Like that back four is as good as the back, if not better, the back four that started against Ross County 3-4 days ago. The midfield, I think it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how they compensate for that lack of pace in the front line, because if you look at how high Tavernier was playing against Ross County, he was sometimes the most advanced player, and I think with Patterson, if he plays really high on the right, that could allow either Hadji to maybe play off the left because he is so two-footed and has a threat on either side, or to just fill that gap in between. As we've spoken about, Rangers have focused a lot of their play down the left so far this season. I just think with Itten, it is definitely a game where you can play 2 forwards, and Itten needs to play games at some point, and he's unlikely to probably start on Sunday. So maybe there's an aspect of whether you keep an Arfield or an Aribo on the bench if you want to try and get a couple of goals and then see out the rest of the game. But I mean, there's a lot of confidence in the comments. Jonathan Holmes says that keeper in defence has a clean sheet incoming, which is great confidence. Yeah. Hugh says Robbie McCrory will be okay. Lots of other people getting in touch. John and 2 Johns to say that we're capable of beating this team and beating anyone. John Ferguson says so. That's great confidence heading into this tie, John. I mean, we'll move on, Johnny.
Well, I mean, they beat Real Madrid in a friendly.
Yeah, in a friendly. I know. And I was very excited after that game. But I guess as well, Johnny, just finally on the squad, if this had happened in Gerrard's first season heading away to Ufa, or the second season against Legia, you'd have felt it much more. Yeah. Now you have players like, Scott Arfield, who hasn't played that much this season, but came off the bench and made such an impact at the weekend. You have Glenn Kamara coming back from suspension. You have 2 fullbacks who didn't play at the weekend who have the same quality as the 2 fullbacks that played against Ross County again at the weekend. It's a desirable situation, and I guess Steven Gerrard's sitting there thinking, I'm glad I'm 3 years into building my squad and not 1 summer into it.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely that's what he'll feel. I mean, Rangers have got a really, really good depth of talent in their team. There's no doubt about that. We saw that all throughout last season. That's how they were able to go unbeaten. And I think as well there's been a touch of fortune in terms of the players that are missing. Obviously, we don't know who's been affected by COVID, who might have an injury. The club are keeping that very close to their chest at the moment. But in terms of those who are not there, they're not in areas where you would feel that the team could be really, really heavily impacted for this specific game, because the centre of midfield, the centre of defence, and Morelos are all good. So the spine of the team is intact. So that leaves Rangers in a reasonable shape for this game. And of course, it might be different come the Celtic game. We don't know how this whole situation is going to pan out, but I think that'll be another thing entirely. And probably in terms of Rangers and the management team, we've heard them say it so many times, it's a cliche, but they will take every game as it comes. So they won't be thinking about Celtic at the moment beyond the medical staff looking at how they can facilitate getting these players back as quickly as possible. But in terms of the management team, they'll just be 100% concentrated on Alashkert. And let's face it, Joshua, we know that if Rangers were to go out of this tie, they drop into the Conference League group stage. And there's still decent money in there for a team to pick up. But at the same time, it is still a bit of a drop. I think it's something like 100,000, roughly 100,000 for a win in the Conference League, whereas the Europa League is 400,000. So it's a bit of a drop-off. It's not the same drop-off as the Champions League to the Europa League, but there's more money to be had in the Europa League. And you would have to think that Rangers would be really, really keen to snaffle some of that dough, given the fact that they've just had an entire season and a half without any crowds at Ibrox. So I think that's important from a financial point of view that they get through.
And also, if hoping that the Rangers do get through is a great opportunity to try and go further in the Europa League, which has been close the last 2 seasons, but not quite there. We'll move on, Johnny, to speak about, you alluded to it there, the management team are focusing on 1 game at a time, and we are not, because we're going to speak about that the SFA rule change from last season that could allow some players who are, as we say, we don't know the identity of players who are isolating, players who are maybe injured. There's some suspensions in there. But up on the site we have this morning, Johnny, an article explaining that there's a possibility under new SFA rules changed on the 9th of August, which allows players or staff identified as close contacts to cut isolation short if they have a negative test after a certain period of time. The rule states that those who have been double vaccinated for more than 14 days prior and with no symptoms can end their self-isolation if they test negative through a PCR test. Now, as you say, Johnny, it's hard to know who falls into which boat because Scott Wright obviously missed the trip to Ross County. I don't know if he travelled up with the squad, but he certainly wasn't on the pitch. And I think we'll come on to Gary McAllister's comments as well. But the club will have to play this well, and I think they have done to this point, because equally you could have only one player has tested positive per se, or two players have. But then equally, if three players fall under this rule change, then Rangers could only be missing a couple of players for the weekend. So it'll be interesting. I guess the lineup will be met with much interest, even more so on Sunday than a normal Old Firm game. Yeah,
and I think there's been a bit of confusion about how close the club is keeping its cards to its chest on this one, and I think it's simply because they'll want to keep the opposition, I would imagine, guessing. Obviously, as well, in terms of COVID, when someone gets COVID, it's private medical information. If they don't want to give that out, then that's absolutely their right, and that has to be respected. So that might be the case as well, that we're unaware of it. A player with COVID might say, "No, I just don't want that information in the public domain." I mean, in terms of what happens against Celtic, I think Rangers, looking at that team that they could select tonight against Alashkert, I think even that has enough to put on a good showing against Celtic. Mm-hmm. Where I would worry, where I would have serious concerns with that team, is a lack of pace in forward areas. I've already said I feel that about Alashkert, although I don't think it'll be a big issue against that team. Sorry, but I think against Celtic, when there's going to be big chances on transition, you need electric pace. It's just going to be something that Rangers are going to need. They're not going to be able to have the same quality in terms of building through the thirds that they normally would against other teams. So it's going to be about direct, quick counter-attacking, especially, and we've got some really good content coming up on the Rangers Review, looking at the space that Celtic are going to leave in wide areas. So you've got to exploit that, and the way you exploit that is through accurate balls from Connor Goldson and hopefully Philip Helander too, and really, really fast wingers either side of these inverted fullbacks.
That would be interesting, and we'll obviously have a full breakdown and look ahead to the game tomorrow morning on the morning briefing. We'll just touch finally, Johnny, on Gary McAllister's press conference, and obviously the news that Steven Gerrard won't be travelling with the squad. Obviously, it'll be the first game. He's had touchline ban since he came to Ibrox, but it'll be the first game he's not in attendance for. It's a bit of a strange situation. Gary McAllister obviously said that he would still be communicating with the team, although he's not in Armenia. He can do that through video calls. Johnny, it's a strange situation to be in, but equally it's excellent that Gary McAllister and Michael Beale are over there, because conceivably if there was a situation where a number of the coaching staff had to isolate, that would be very difficult, and maybe we'd have seen Jimmy Bell take the team or something. But it's great that McAllister, and which maybe would have been fun. I would love to see a press conference with Jimmy Bell, but McAllister and Beale over there, Gerrard on a video call. It seems like not too much is disrupted compared to what it could have been in the circumstances of this outbreak.
Yeah, I think their initial reports suggested Michael Beale wasn't going to be there, and all of us tactics squads immediately recoiled in horror at this notion that Mick Beale wouldn't be there. So the news that he actually was there was a terrific boost in that sense, and I think that is a big boost from a point of view of just having somebody there who has the tactical nous and make sure the players are prepared in the same way as normal. So having McAllister and Beale there, it means that there's going to be less disruption than there would have been otherwise. Gerrard obviously will be a loss. He's the leader, but you have to say the quality of opposition means that you would hope that just him being able to do the various elements that he can through video call will mean that Rangers are still in a pretty solid position. Of course, it's an imperfect scenario. Of course, it's a difficult scenario. But with today's modern technology, with the people that they've got out there, I don't think it's going to be an issue. I really don't.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Right. We'll leave it there. The game obviously is at 4 o'clock today. You'll have all the reaction. So remember, it's not an 8 o'clock game. You'll have all the reaction on the Rangers Review site. We'll be back tomorrow morning to pick the bones through what was hopefully a successful night for Rangers in Europe. Remember, you can subscribe to the Rangers Review for just $2.99 a month for top quality journalism every single day of the week. And we'll be back tomorrow morning to look back at Alashkert and look forward to the Old Firm.